I would say that the interpretation of music takes place in very different places, and all of them are valid. In many conservatories, students are taught to internalize something that is called musicality. They bring that musicality to the score. They come up with their own reading. That reading may or may not be informed by the original historical context, though it will be informed by the historical moment of the performer, because that notion of musicality is always marked by the taste of the moment, the teachers that person works with, the performances that have been attended, the recordings that have been listened to. All of those things create a kind of historical stamp on musicality. We can't escape history. We can, however, come up with very different ways of integrating history, either attempts at thinking what would this have meant in the composer's time, or should we try for a postmodernist deconstruction of this piece, which I think also is a very exciting thing to do. But just bringing some kind of frozen notion of musicality to a score then limits the intellectual engagement in the process of music making. I prefer to think about what the choices are and why I'm making the choices I'm making. One of the things that I have been most concerned with in the last few years is French music of the 17th century. Until quite recently, that music was regarded by most people as somehow or other not working the way music is supposed to work. You will find that statement written even in major textbooks concerning Western music history. You'll get to the 17th century in France and you will say, well, they wrote these little dances, but they don't really do much, but they seem to like them, and so there. And I used to go along with that. I specialize in music of the 16th and 17th centuries. And I have always found the Italian music much, much more compelling. But I finally decided that I couldn't stand to look at myself in the mirror anymore and say that, well, this music somehow or other doesn't work. I mean, what in the world could that possibly mean? It can only mean that it doesn't work in accordance with something that I have already assumed in advance as some kind of universal. And obviously the universal doesn't hold if this music doesn't make sense to me. So I set myself the project one summer that I wasn't going to let myself play any other music except these little 17th century French dances for harpsichord. And I played them, and I played them, and I played them. And they really sounded to me, and I'm afraid to my husband, like nonsense for quite a while. And then something began to click. And I began to find that I would turn to a new dance, and suddenly there would be these amazing details. And I would think, oh my, look at that. Look what it did there. And I would figure out what I would need to do to make it audible to a listener, what those moments were. What I finally came up with was that French music of that time has a radically different temporality, radically different sense of being in time from its counterparts in either Germany or Italy. If you bring the temporality of Italian music to French music, you just run roughshod over all of those details. You come up with nothing except that this music doesn't work. If, on the other hand, you allow yourself to hover in the timeless state, to hang up on an ornament, to allow your virtual body to dance, in this very stylized way that people who study early dance are also recovering now. This music is absolutely exquisite. it cannot be translated. It doesn't even travel onto the piano. I will sometimes find I will bring it into my classes. I don't have a harpsichord handy. I'll think, oh, well, I'll just sit down at the piano. And it just sounds awful. This music is merciless. It demands exactly the right instruments, exactly the right sounds, exactly the right sense of nuance, exactly the right hovering. There has to be this bending of the time. If you play metrically, nothing happens. Once you have figured out how to do it, then this can be music you never want to do anything else. But it was a very difficult conversion process. I had to trust that the musicians in the court of Louis XIV knew what they were doing. And if I didn't get it, it was my fault. And I had to figure out how to get into that landscape, how to look at the paintings of the time, how to read the literature of the time, how even to look at the theology of the time, and the ways in which mystics describe ecstasy and trance. All of those things contributed to my ability to try to reconstruct a kind of temporality that is radically different from the ones we have internalized as musicality or the way that music is supposed to go.